Welcome to the ListenUp Podcast, where we explore hearing loss, communication, connections, and health.
Hi, everybody. Dr. Mark Sims here. I'm the host of the ListenUp Podcast, where I feature top leaders in healthcare. This episode is brought to you by ListenUp Hearing Centers. I help patients to effectively treat their hearing loss so that they can connect better with their friends and family and remain independent. The reason I'm so passionate about hearing loss is because I lost my brother Robbie twice. First to his hearing loss from radiation to his brain tumor, and later when he passed away. I only care for ears. I'm the E of ENT. I've taken care of tens of thousands of patients with hearing loss and performed over 10,000 ear surgeries. I'm the founder of ListenUp Hearing Center. I'm also the author of a book, Listen Up, A Physician's Guide to Effectively Treating Your Hearing Loss. If you want to learn more about this, go to listenuphearing.com. Today, I have Jill Davis. She's an awesome audiologist who's the owner and clinical director of Victory Hearing and Balance in Austin. She holds a doctorate of audiology and a bachelor's degree in communication science and disorders from University of Cincinnati, and she specializes in fitting of highly advanced digital hearing aids. Dr. Davis has a passion for improving communication for patients and believes music has a significant impact on our ability to understand speech, and we're going to explore a lot of that today. Outside of the office, she enjoys spending time with her husband and children, as well as playing tennis, reading, and taking road trips. She has an excellent clinical training because she trained with us at Arizona Hearing Center. She was a student long ago, but now she's a thriving private practitioner. Jill, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to see you. We haven't connected in a long time. Jill's out on the national arena talking about music and hearing loss and cognition. And so that's kind of what led me to say, hey, we should have Jill on the podcast. I invited her and here she is. So this is great. So Jill, tell me a little bit about your story in terms of how you ended up in, hearing loss audiology, et cetera. At some point you weren't in it, and how'd you end up in it?
I wanted to be a physical therapist, actually. I think that's kind of a common theme in our industry, that we start in one and transfer to the other.
Yeah, the most common is speech language pathology, and then they take an audiology class and they go, this is cool.
Which is funny because I did not want to work with kids, so speech was my least favorite. But I wanted to do physical therapy. They told me I had to get a master's and I was going to add 2 more years to school. And I said, that's not for me. So I started taking other courses. I remember my dad told me back in the day that I should be an audiologist because we could hear those cars thumping. You could feel it before you could hear it. And he said, all those people in the cars are going to be deaf in 10 years. You should be an audiologist. And I didn't know what it was. But I took a course because I thought maybe I'll look into that. And sure enough, at Cincinnati, I was in the first class that had to go 4 years. It was the doctorate as the entry level position for audiologists. But because I loved it, it made sense. So
that's great. And then so you, if I recollect, you moved to Austin, and it sounds like you hung out your own shingle. I think that's a fair enough thing. So tell me a little bit about your practice and how it's developed and what you do at your center.
Yeah, I bought this clinic 3.5 years ago from an audiologist who was in business for 16 years. He decided to move to New Zealand. And so I was in the ENT space for a long time before that, some private practice, but mostly working with ENTs. And they reached out to me to see if I was interested. And of course I was. And so it was mostly a dispensing practice. I rent space from a group of primary care physicians. So I have a really nice network there, even though we're separate entities. And so I've added a lot of services since taking over. I don't rely just on dispensing. We've added cochlear implants, everything I learned from you. We joined the CPN network, some vestibular screening, auditory processing disorder, and then a heavy focus on auditory training with music.
All right. So, obviously all great topics, but tell me about your pathway into music and all that. Is that because you're in Austin or just there's a lot of music there, so that might make it, but tell me about that particular, what has been your pathway to that?
Yeah, it started about 7 years ago, actually. I saw Anu Sharma presenting her research on the cortical reorganization that occurs with untreated hearing loss. Hannah Glick, Anu Sharma, those beautiful images where we had learned there was a connection between hearing loss and dementia. And I wasn't comfortable talking to my patients about that because I didn't quite understand it until I saw those images, and it made so much sense to me. And at that time, I was reading a book called This Is Your Brain on Music by Daniel Levitin. And it honestly felt like grad school all over again. It was like everything I know about sound in the brain. And it was like, well, if this is a book on music and it's themes just like what I learned in my AUD program, why didn't I learn about music and the benefits it has on the brain? And there has to be a connection between music training and the changes that happen with untreated hearing loss. And so it started this deep dive into the neuromusical research to kind of understand that connection and see how I could use music to help my patients with poor cognition or difficulty hearing and background noise.
So tell me a little bit about that. In other words, not just what you do from a practical point of view, but some of the background so the listeners would want to know about that. So
yeah, the research has been there for about 30 years or so. Whenever the EEG became available, the functional MRI, that's when they started looking at the brain when it's doing specific things. And so they would put someone under the functional MRI and they would have them reading a book or writing or doing something and watch in the brain where the activity was. And they put someone in and had them listening to music, and they thought that they had broken the equipment because the screen just lit up with fireworks. And all over. And they thought, okay, now we can use music as a tool to understand more about the brain. So a flood of neuromusical research came out. Nina Krause's lab is a really big one. I know she was on your show. Dr. Anita Collins is in Australia, and she's a really big advocate, has a community of professionals trying to educate on the benefits of music training. And so I learned a lot through going through those articles. And there was just this common theme that was music training improves our ability to hear in background noise, and it can improve our memory because those two are together. We need great memory to hear well in background noise. Our brain has to fill in the blanks of what the ears aren't hearing. And so that's how I kind of put it together.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. As approaching medical school, there was some research out there that studying to music helped you retain information better. My particular learning style is I don't do well with auditory distraction. For me, it's auditory distraction, but I did try it because it showed that if you listen to certain rhythms, that the music would help you put the stuff into your brain. Maybe it was there, I just couldn't recall it. So, but it has been around for a long time. And so, you're when you talk about doing that, so, when you do this with your patients, I assume then you started trying to integrate it. So what was your first foray into this? In other words, what things did you start at the beginning? Because it's always interesting. We all read this stuff and then we say, well, how am I going to integrate this into my practice? And it's not like you can go all of a sudden like, okay, I've got a full program. Usually we dip our toe and do a little bit of it. So when you first dipped your toe, what did you do with your patients, Joe?
Oh, what was funny is I thought that just listening would help. And so I set up a listening lab. I had these really cool gramophones, and I was going to have our patients sit with hearing aids, listen to music. And as I'm learning, Nina Krause says it best, you can't get physically active by watching someone play a sport. You have to be engaged. You have to activate the motor center of the brain. The memory part of the brain is active when you're listening, and that's why they say that it helps you retain the information. But I wonder if you might have some auditory processing disorder. Some of us that need quiet to study, we can't tolerate that. So.
Well, I also, in all honesty, this is personal, but, loud noises, I think I have a less tolerance of it. So probably whatever that means, right? In other words, that's a whole nother deep dive, auditory processing and standard deviations from the mean and whether or not that's how you define it. But we'll leave it at that. That might be the case. I definitely need quiet.
Yeah, those are candidates that are, we're seeing really big improvements with music training because they found that the size of the corpus callosum grows 3 times when you're activating that motor center and you're learning to play an instrument. And a lot of times that's where the breakdown is, but I digressed. So what I learned is that you had to actually play an instrument. And one thing to really make clear is that there is a difference between music therapy and music training. So music training is just playing an instrument, but there are music therapists, just like speech therapists, physical therapists, occupational therapists. They are board certified musicians and therapists that can tailor the training or the therapy to the individual based on their needs. we're talking about just playing an instrument, which is what the research shows can show improvements. And so
you're talking about musical training is playing an instrument. Musical therapy is therapy from a trained therapist. And just out of curiosity, what's that look like as compared to, musical training is you playing an instrument. Mm-hmm. Musical therapists, do they play for you or teach you to play?
They're actually going to tailor the instrument and the recommendations based on what they need. So they work with a lot of our dementia patients. They work with maybe our Parkinson's folks that need to walk. They can add a rhythm to the treadmill. They're doing that here in Austin. They work with autism. They work with just getting tailored benefits for that individual issue, where what we're looking at is if you just play an instrument, you should see improvements in other activities because music and speech are processed in the same area of the brain. And so music therapists go to the house, they look at the overall person and come up with what would be a best fit for them.
Sure. Okay. And so your program, you're doing music training.
So what I did,
trying to get the vocabulary, musical training, right? And so when you approach somebody, who maybe either has a hearing loss or has some cognitive issues, and you say, I want you to consider musical training, when you first started, what'd you do? Hand them a harmonica and say, go at it, or what'd you do?
No, actually, I was looking to the literature to see the shortest amount of time with the biggest amount of benefit and what the protocols were in the labs and the research. And what I found is that they saw improvements after 3 months when someone played an instrument 3 days a week for an hour. And so I copied that protocol because it was consistent throughout that literature and they used any kind of instrument. And what I found is that people like to push back. They have excuses for trying something new. They like to say, well, I don't want to buy an instrument. I don't want to sign up for classes. I don't need an instructor. And this is heavy during the pandemic that I actually launched it. And so I found an app and I partnered with this company called Flowkey out of Berlin. And it's an app that you learn to play the keyboard on your tablet or your phone. And so you start by training on the tablet and then you transfer onto an actual keyboard. And I have keyboards in my office to rent to these patients so that they can't say, I don't have the money, I don't want to buy it. So I did whatever I could to get away from any of those excuses. So I looked at the keyboard specifically. I found that harmony instruments actually show the most benefit in the brain because they're more complex, but you could do rhythm and drums, you could do guitar, whatever you're gonna play is a great instrument. But I tried to find in my clinic ones that I could just help and support, and the keyboard was the easiest for me. And so
the fact that there's an app that can transition, I don't know why, but I think the harmonica is a cool instrument because you put it in your pocket, you can do it anytime. But, that's about the extent of how far I've gotten learning how to play. And so part of it's also, not having to invest in, finding a piano teacher is not easy, especially, finding a piano teacher that perhaps you mesh with and wants to meet the same goals that you do. My children played piano. Some of them still do. Some of them don't. They would, for instance, these piano teachers would want to do these very heavy classical music things. And I'd be like, well, and then my kids would sit down and they'd want to play pop music, right? So there was a disparity between what the teacher wanted to teach and what the student wanted to learn. And so it's not easy. So it's smart to do that.
Yeah, everyone was looking for a hobby during the pandemic. So I think that helped too. And there's a lot of YouTube videos. There's ways that you can teach yourself, but these apps, they do have more popular music. So once you get to that point, you can actually play what you want. They have Baby Shark, they have Queen, whatever's popular at the moment.
So do you play?
I put myself through my program. So
Good.
It took me a little less than 3 months because I just wanted to make sure I got it all down. I made my kids start playing and I played a little bit as a kid, but so I added that. When I have free time, I'll sit down and play.
Okay, that's great. And so you literally have electronic keyboards that you have in your office and you let them use and stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, they're $50 on Amazon. I keep 5 in my lab at all time. They rent it for the 3 months. Flowkey sponsors a 3-month subscription to my customers. And if they decide they want to keep going after that, they can buy the keyboard from me or they can bring it back if they're finished.
Okay. And so do you consider the music training a 3-month program? And so what does that look like? Is that where the literature shows the benefit ends, or that's where you get the max, or where you should realize that this is helping you and you should continue?
Yeah, the literature shows that we do see big benefits, but usually 2 years is when it really takes on the most benefit. And so it's enough to get started. It's enough to get them in the new routine and to, see if they like it. And I am anecdotally finding improvements in their memory and their Wixen is the speech and noise test that I do pre and post. I've only had one or two that stopped after 3 months. The rest have invested in a piano of their own. They've bought their own sheet music. They've gotten in-person instructions. The ones who couldn't finish actually had a little bit more cognitive issues than I would expect. And it was a little more difficult for them to adjust to the app.
Oh, so meaning their cognition was impaired so much that kind of catching on was a little harder and it became frustrating or difficult for them?
Yep. And so that's where I've partnered with music therapists. And so I have
they're the ones who should go on to the next and say, oh, the home program's not working. You need to do this. And so the musical therapist, how often do they, is it a 3 times a week type of thing too for an hour?
Yeah, they set that schedule. So they'll evaluate and see where the patient will benefit more.
That's really great, Jill. And so how many people do you have doing this program? I think this is a great idea, fascinating. And this is the beauty of there's literature out there. You can read it, integrate it into your practice, and kind of go from there. That's awesome.
Yeah, so I've given out over 350 codes through the app, and whether they've all gone through or not, I have an online platform that I train other audiologists how to implement the music training, and about 40 of them have signed up and started doing this with their patients as well. And so, yeah.
So if people want to look at that, where do they get to that from?
So it's the Victory Brain Training Program. So I have a Thinkific platform. If you reach out to me through my email, I can send you the link to go through that.
That's great. And so how long does that take?
So from start to finish, it's probably a 40-minute course. And that's just that review of the neuromusical research, just to get comfortable with explaining it to patients, identifying who are the best candidates for the program. And then just what to do and coaching calls and how to get through it. And then I want to make sure everyone does it on their own so that they know.
It's interesting. I think that's great. You're basically selling, helping people to expand it. That's really awesome. 40 people have gone through it. That's great too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the thing about, you mentioned I'm in Austin and, I have a lot of patients who are musicians, and this is not necessarily for those customers. If someone has music training experience already, they're not really a great candidate for this program.
Oh, I'm sure they're too well trained, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. They should have all the benefits that stick with you a lifetime. Once you have that musical training, the benefits are there for life versus some of our other auditory training programs that I'll recommend if they are a musician. They've shown that after about 6 months, the gains don't stick. And so they recommend like a retraining course or that you stick with it for a long time. But I was really having a hard time with my patients adopting the auditory training and sticking with it. And so that's why I had to look for something else.
So what type for the musicians, what do you recommend for auditory programs?
I really like Amplify right now. Brain HQ is popular as well. Those two, I seem to have more success with people getting started.
And you're getting compliance, most important.
Mm-hmm. I think it's because, we do some cognitive screening, we do some speech and noise testing, and like they can see where they are, and they are very motivated to either improve their score or they understand the connection. And I didn't have that before when we were trying to do auditory training. I didn't have like a screening that really explained where they were at the moment. And so that's where I think the compliance is higher.
Yeah, I think, what we're all talking about is how, the field is moving away from restoring audition to the cochlea to understanding how important the brain has to do with these functions. And most of the subjective complaints that people have aren't just, I have poor hearing at 3,000 hertz and above, and I can't get the consonants, as, we talk about. I'm talking about typical hearing loss of aging. Those circumstances are more than just, I don't get those parts of the sound. it's much more, I think there's so much that's going to evolve over the next even 5 to 10 years about this stuff. I mean, the field is moving at an incredibly rapid rate in this type of stuff. So.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Everyone comes in complaining, I can't hear in background noise, or I can hear, but I can't understand. And as audiologists, we've been trained that that's their presbycusis, that's their age-related hearing loss, that's their high frequency loss that's getting in the way, when what I've learned is actually, there's the cognitive piece that no matter what we do with the ears, it's not going to improve. It's more that top-down processing where there's a problem, not necessarily bottom-up. And so that's where looking at that complaint, is it that they just don't have the memory to hear well in background noise, or they can hear the sound, they just don't understand the meaning of the word? And so that's why it helps to take a look at the whole central auditory system.
Yeah, I guess the question I have to you, which comes to mind to me, is how do you communicate? Those things are all true. On the flip side, everybody has problems in background noise, right? Like, so if you theoretically have perfect cognition with perfect hearing, there is a point where an imperfect listening environment is going to compromise you no matter what, right? Like if the signal is the same loudness as all of the background noise, you're just not going to hear it because the background noise and them are the same. So how do you communicate that concept? Because I think that that's the other concept is, and I'm guilty of this. Sometimes I say, well, everybody has problems in background noise. So you do want to normalize. That's where sometimes I struggle with patients is like, okay, yes, you have problems in background noise. How close should we get to, or how do you talk about that with patients? Because it's an interesting concept.
Well, I focus on music, of course, but what I've learned in the literature is that when we do not have music training, we rely on the pitch of sound to understand speech. And if we're not hearing the pitches correctly, or if they are distorted because of the background noise, we struggle a little bit more, where musicians actually detect the rhythm and the harmony of sound to know what they're hearing. So musicians always outperform non-musicians in those difficult listening environments because they listen to sound a different way. And so teaching the rhythm of the sound, and I've actually had a cochlear implant candidate test out of candidacy, and nothing changed except for the music training because he was able to listen a different way. And so, I'd never say, well, it's normal. That's normal how you hear in background noise. We all struggle. It's like, well, let's try something else and see if we can't train your brain to hear a different way and see if that improves.
Yeah. So I guess, using an athletic analogy, nobody runs a mile in a second, right? And so there is some people take longer than others. And so you're talking about improving your speed rather than making it so you can do something impossible. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's all about incremental improvement of performance rather than absolute performance. I guess the hard part is getting people to, I guess it's also counseling, right? What are difficult listening environments? Why are, restaurants that pipe in sound? I always tell people go to a cheesecake factory in the middle of the day when it's empty and it's pretty bustling and loud. And then you realize that they're actually piping in the background noise to get you to eat faster, right? Those, people have to become more aware of what are just going to be difficult listening environments purposefully. Like that's one of the things they can't believe is that there are organizations or entities that have a better interest in making it hard for you to hear. So you do other activities like chew and eat, swallow and get up and go so they can put somebody else down at the table.
As I learned from my time working in restaurants throughout grad school, yes, you want to make it as uncomfortable as possible to make more money. Get them out of there.
Yeah, well, the issue is, and as well as I do, acoustically friendly restaurants are pricey, right? Carpets, drapes, booths, cloth tables, cloths, no rush to flip the table. You're talking about a relatively expensive dining experience as compared to something that's more economical and affordable.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you counsel your patients about that? Interestingly.
There's an app called Soundprint. Have you ever heard of it? So it takes a look on the map of the restaurants in your area, and it has a decibel reading, and it tells you how loud the restaurant is at that time. So during happy hour, it's usually louder. If not, so I recommend the app for them, but also just talk about, if they're wearing hearing devices, how to position themselves away from the noise. Meet Killian has this amazing new product. It's a C mic, and you can have 4 people wearing microphones on the ear at the same time, and each of them are wearing a remote microphone. And so you get to hear everyone. And it's the first time that we can hear multiple conversations. Usually our remote mics for hearing aids, cochlear implants is one person.
Ring around, right?
Yeah. And so this is, for 4 people at a time. I think it's fantastic.
No, I do, because I think, you're talking about like the Roger mic, which is for the listeners, is a microphone based like a pen. The problem is it's all predicated on the fact that you can track the microphone to the speaker. And so it makes sense, but for a true social conversation, it moves around too quickly, right? Like it'd be more like a fist following people around because, in banter, if you want to call it, you're not going to be able to put the microphone. So that overcomes that issue for banter, right? Because I counsel patients that 4 is tolerable and 5 becomes very difficult, right? So once you get to 5 people at a restaurant, for instance, typically 2 conversations will happen. And that becomes very difficult for patients with hearing impairment. A 5-person table is profoundly different than a 4, because if 2 couples go out, then usually one person speaks at a time.
Mm-hmm. Yep, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So touching on that, so you've kind of, if I were to say back where your way into the cognition thing through music. Is that a fair statement as compared to many people who are seeing the emerging literature about cognition and maybe looking at music as another way? So just, subjectively, what type of impacts are you seeing with your patients with what do they tell you? What do they say about their music therapy?
A lot of them love it. They have this new hobby. I've had people who are have more energy at the end of the day. That's what they tell me. They're doing better at working with both hands, so that coordination has improved. A lot of them say, this is really fun. I didn't realize it had already been 3 months. And so how I'm seeing the benefits is the unaided speech and noise performance improves. Aided always, it does too, but they're unaided.
No, that's fascinating, right? So it's not with reliance of the hearing instruments, it's just their own, and that would be right? So you take the hearing aids out of the equation, measure their pre and post hearing and noise. That's fascinating. Mm-hmm. Do you see any improvement of hearing and noise with patients wearing hearing aids who haven't done musical therapy? In other words, does their unaided response improve with aided rehabilitation?
Yes, I do see that about 70% of the time, that just with the hearing aids, their improvement in the unaided and the cognition improves. And then the other folks that don't improve, that's when I implement the auditory training. And one of the trends that I've seen is that an aided, and I do the quick SIN, I do AZ Bio, I do W22 and noise, depending on what they're coming in for. But when they're aided, quick SIN presented 70 dB and the sound field is not within normal limits, so 0 to 3 decibels, they usually aren't going to pass the CogniView. And so I'm finding that if I've verified their hearing aids, I know I've done what I can with the ears, and they still can't pass the aided part of the quick SIN, then usually we're going to still see some issues with, and that's when we implement. So it's just, I've gotten a clearer look at who needs the auditory training, because I know we all have those patients that still struggle with noise, but when they say they are, is it the hearing aids and we're all conditioned to just make adjustments, make changes, or is something else involved? And if it's something else, let's take a look at comorbidities, see what else we can do, start the auditory training. So.
Well, it's a more holistic approach, right? It's not, I'm just going to present it to the cochlea and we're going to get a normal audiogram when you're rehabilitated. And so that's it. I've done my part. Right. It's a more holistic approach at the hearing or listening. I mean, that's a whole nother issue in terms of what terminology. I think the terminology is evolving between hearing, understanding, listening, comprehension. Those words are kind of becoming interchangeable in some ways, and we probably have to refine our vocabulary, but that's nothing you or I are going to figure out today. That's for sure.
Right.
So that's great. And so when is your organization's concert?
I should. Oh my gosh, I have videos because I do trainings on this, and I have videos of my folks coming in and playing for me. The first one was a 6-year-old and her mother who played the first Noel, and I just broke out in tears. They sent me a video. It was so sweet. And then I had a 68-year-old gentleman that came in, and his goal was to play Christmas carols with his grandkids. So he's working on that. So I should get them all together.
Oh, that's great. So one question I love asking everybody, Jill, so what's your favorite sound?
Oh, music, I think.
Music. And so do you come from a musical background, or is this
No.
a casual, just kind of falling into it through your audiology practice and now you've developed the love for it? Is that kind of...
I bought that book, This Is Your Brain on Music, because my hobby is collecting vinyl albums, vinyl records. I love music. We do not play in my family, like maybe piano lessons as kids, but it was more, I like music. I work with the brain. Let's put these together. And so that's how that started.
So like a passionate hobby aligned with your profession.
Yeah.
That's really good. And so where do you see this going? In other words, so if you were to, see music, and its role in all of this 5-10 years from now, where do you see the field going? I mean, certainly, music has gotten more attention. Some of it's been user driven, right? That, on the cochlear implant side, people who have an affinity for music will say, this doesn't sound like I had hoped it would sound, because as you know, music is much more complex than spoken language. And that's actually, I think, the point. But that being said, where do you see, music and hearing and all that going over in the near future?
I think it's just going to supplement our treatment options. I think that it's something that everyone can benefit from, and you're going to see more and more music studies in the neurology space. So, for example, right now, USF is doing a grant-funded study on the benefits of playing a piano specifically with memory. And so, because audiology is switching into that cognition, functional hearing, I think we're just going to, it'll be there as a supplement to the treatments we're already doing. And it won't be a question of why are we doing this and what's the benefit. It's just going to be second nature. We all love music. So it's going to be something that we'll have at our fingertips to offer our patients that want it.
No, I think that's great. And congratulations for putting a program together. I think that's really awesome and amazing, Jill. Kudos to you for doing that. Right. I mean, let's be honest. You got, a family to take care of, a practice to take care of. And on top of that, you are exploring a passion and helping your patients through the literature. That takes a dedication that I really admire. That's awesome.
Well, thank you so much.
So if people want to get a hold of you, Jill, how would they do that? Where would they go and how would they get a hold of you?
Yeah, probably my email's best, jdavis@victoryhearing.com.
Okay. And so victoryhearing.com is your practice website, right? Yep. And so, for everybody, and this is Jill Davis. She's Dr. Jill Davis. She's the owner and clinical director of Victory Hearing and Balance in Austin, Texas. And so if you want to learn more about this, she has a music program that I think would be great. I'm going to actually take the class in the near future. It's on my immediate to-do list now that you've really piqued my interest about this. And Jill, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we'll do a follow-up episode, on cognition. We didn't even really get to cognition, but, this is, to me, this passionate project that you developed for yourself is amazing, and you're to be congratulated.
Well, thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks for coming on. This has been great.
Thanks for tuning in to the ListenUp Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get updates on future episodes.